Hi friends, did you know that the right fatty foods can decrease your blood pressure? Today we're going to take a deep dive on the healthiest fats that you can eat to normalize blood pressure naturally. This is the only fat that we have to get from our food. The other fats you can make on your own and learn the other health benefits of the right fats. First, we were told don't eat fat, and then we were sold margarine as a healthy alternative.
I can't believe it's not butter.
I can't believe it's not butter. The taste you love without the cholesterol.
Suddenly, margarine became the worst thing you could eat, full of trans fats.
Trans fat. Trans fat is every bit as nasty as it sounds.
And now we are told eat fat, it's good for you. Sheesh! I wish people would make up their minds too. And as you can tell, it's super confusing because not all fats are equal in quality. There are different types of fats in our foods, and when we cook with them and add heat to them, it changes how they interact with our foods, which then changes how the foods interact with our bodies. The wrong fats not only raise your blood pressure, but they can cause impotence, back pain, strokes, and heart attacks simply by blocking blood flow. You want that? Not I. If you want to normalize your blood pressure, then it's important that you become an expert on dietary fats. Different fats change how flexible your arteries are, how much nitric oxide your body produces, which is an important molecule to lower your blood pressure, how your kidneys handle sodium, which directly elevates or lowers your blood pressure, and how inflamed or stiff your blood vessels become. Stiff blood vessels pop. And when it pops, that causes strokes and heart attacks. And that's why it's important that we take a deep dive into dietary fats so that you don't get lost listening to the wrong social media influencers and end up with high blood pressure and even worse, the complications of that. And if you already have high blood pressure, it's never too late to make dietary changes. Just talk to your own medical provider because the right dietary changes can correct that blood pressure within a few short days. And that's great unless you pass out. And that has happened to many people and is a very common side effect of high blood pressure medications. Don't you find it ironic that some of our early American presidents that served in the 1700s live longer than we do now? They didn't have access to our modern American drugs. There's a problem when we end up living less long than American presidents who didn't have access to big pharma and invasive interventions. And I don't think they were disadvantaged. President John Adams, he lived till 90. And he didn't have GLP-1 agonists, statins, or diabetes medications, or access to dialysis. You would think that we should all be able to beat him, right? We should, if we ate like him and moved like him. And I'll tell you his secret later. I think he literally discovered the fountain of youth. So let's dissect some modern foods to see which fats are hidden where. Now, most people get the majority of fats from super common foods, with the largest being pizza, burgers, tacos, fries, chips, crackers, pastries, donuts, cookies, and packaged snack goods, all fatty foods. Hey, my family also eats some of those things too. And this is a burger that I served my son tonight. For my family, I don't exclude these very common foods. My goal is just to make them a healthier version and to limit how often they get to eat it. Now, keep in mind, how healthy you are when you're eating these things will dictate how sick you feel after you eat them. For example, if you already have heart disease, struggling with fatty liver, insulin resistance, you may not feel so good if you eat the wrong fats. Paying attention to the right fat can significantly improve your outcome and how well you will feel. So take this burger, for instance. This burger that I made for my son is not a low-fat burger, but is a low-saturated fat burger, as it's made out of avocado oil, high in monounsaturated fat. If you have heart disease, high blood pressure, strokes, diabetes, cancer, or you just simply really want to optimize your health, then saturated fat is the one fat to actively limit. The dietary guidelines suggest less than 10%. Lots of data suggests you should go even lower than that, less than 5%. That translates to roughly 10 to 15 grams saturated fat per day. Now, if you're going to eat any fat, then choose an oil that is high in monounsaturated fat. And there are lots to choose from. Basically, go to your cooking oil section and you'll find a plethora of different monounsaturated fats. Keep in mind that all of those oils have some saturated fat, and excess fats of any kind will get converted to saturated fat. However, studies show that replacing saturated fat like butter and margarine with monounsaturated fats can lower your cholesterol. In general, don't exceed calories for any food group. If you eat a 2,000 calorie diet, limit your fats to 20 to 30 grams a day. Unless you already have excess high blood sugars and insulin resistance, then you probably should be going even lower to get your dietary fats to the very minimum. And when you eat fats, get them by eating whole foods like nuts and seeds. But I know that you may want to cook with some oil. And if you want to know how I pick a cooking oil, I'll share that with you a little bit later. The reality is most people are eating prepared foods made by food companies. And if you started the day with a cherry-filled donut for breakfast, you probably ate 25 grams of fat. A plain cake donut is usually around 10 to 12 grams of fat. A yeast-raised glazed donut is closer to 12 to 15 grams of fat. Now, if you've had a filled or frosted donuts like chocolate, cream-filled, or maple bars, they often will reach 18 to 25 grams of fat because of all the added fillings and coatings. And most of this fat comes from frying oils and shortening with a mix of refined monounsaturated fats and saturated fats. And sometimes residual trans fats are there. And these are all reasons why donuts are so very calorie dense despite being so small. A plain cake donut is usually about 250 to 270 calories. A glazed yeast donut is about 260 to 280 calories. Chocolate frosted or maple donuts are typically 300 to 330 calories. And cream-filled or specialty donuts can reach 350 to 400 calories because of all the added sugar and the fat from the fillings and toppings. Now, calories alone won't tell you how your body will use all that fat, but it does all add up to total weight gain. So that donut is about 1/5 to 1/4 of total calories that you should be eating in a day. And for those of you who believe on eating a high-fat diet, then why can't you just eat donuts? Obviously, it's not healthy. And that's because the donut comes with biological baggage that cancels health benefits. Now, when food is fried, high heat fundamentally changes the food, the oil, and how your body responds to that new chemical now. And this isn't just adding fat, it's a chemical transformation. Frying temperatures accelerate oxidation, especially in polyunsaturated oils. This creates lipid peroxides, aldehydes, and reactive compounds that damage cell membranes, LDL particles, and mitochondria once eaten. Now, reused or overheated oil is far worse because degradation compounds accumulate with each heating cycle. Proteins and sugars also react together through heat. That's called the Maillard reaction. Now, this produces browning and also flavor, but it also forms advanced glycation end products called AGEs. AGEs, or AGEs, increases oxidative stress, stiffening your blood vessels, impairing insulin signaling, and accelerating aging at all tissue levels. And your body, it doesn't need that kind of stress, but it can use good fats for cell membranes, hormones, brain function, and signaling. Those fats need to arrive intact, unoxidized, and packaged with nutrients. Donuts don't do that, folks. The fats in donuts are mostly fried, refined, and heat damaged, often mixed with saturated fat and trace trans fat. So by the time they reach your body, they're more inflammatory than supportive. And donuts, they will raise your LDL, they will raise your triglycerides, they will increase your risk of diabetes, promote oxide LDL, and weaken HDL's protective role. And over time, that pattern, it accelerates your blood pressure because it accelerates plaque formation. It does not support healthy cholesterol balance. And I'm picking on donuts because it still is one of America's favorite breakfast foods, but it's also what Christian churches thinks are acceptable to serve to their parishioners. And it's just one of my pet peeves. It's probably one of the worst foods you can eat, and yet we celebrate with it and we serve it to our fellow brothers and sisters. It's just not something that we should be sharing. So let's say you prefer a salty breakfast, like sausages. Shouldn't it be better since there isn't any carbs or sugar? Well, breakfast sausage does look very different from a donut, but metabolically, it basically pushes your body in a similar unhealthy direction, just through a different pathway. So every time I go to breakfast with my girlfriends, quite a few of them will always order a typical breakfast with sausage link, sausage patties. They contain about 180 to 250 calories, and most of those calories come from fat. One serving usually has 15 to 20 grams of fat, with 6 to 8 grams being saturated fat. It also contains 60 to 80 grams of cholesterol, depending on the cut of meat and the processing. And the ingredients in the breakfast sausage, honestly, it tends to raise your LDL cholesterol. It promotes arterial stiffness, it worsens your insulin resistance, it raises your blood pressure. It's usually paired with refined carbohydrates. Like donuts, it provides calories and fat, but not in the form that supports your long-term metabolic and cardiovascular health. And few people eat these calorie-dense, insulin-stimulating sausages alone. They're often eaten with ultra-processed refined breakfast foods like pancakes and biscuits or toast. And this combination increases hepatic cholesterol and triglyceride production. It raises LDL. And over time, it simply worsens your lipid profile, increases your cardiovascular disease risk. And this is in spite of keeping your calories down. The higher your LDL cholesterol and triglycerides, the worse your blood pressure will be. Hence, lower your saturated fat intake if you want to lower your blood pressure. And that's super easy to get rid of. And it's easier said than done because our lunches, our dinners are full of saturated fat with lunch meat. Meat in general is a major contributor of saturated fat, whether it's beef, pork, in the form of sausage or bacon, hot dogs, deli meats, fried chicken, breaded chicken meats, they supply large amounts of saturated fat. And in processed forms, oxidized fats from cooking. Even lean meats contribute pretty good, decent fat content, especially when eaten regularly. Animal meats and animal products are high in saturated fat, and that's simply why it's so tasty. The typical fat ratio of a meat serving is roughly 40-45% saturated fat and 40-45% monounsaturated fat. However, you can lower the fat significantly by some easy swaps. So instead of buying beef that's 80-20, switch to a leaner beef 90-10. And when you cook it, the fat will come off. Just tilt your pan and then pour that fat off. Don't use that fat to cook other food. And when you eat beef, it's especially important to pair it with high fiber foods like beans, vegetables, or intact grains. It actually can blunt the post-meal lipid absorption and insulin stress of that meal. But if you like sausage, instead of buying pork sausages, try turkey sausage or a plant-based sausage. That can significantly reduce the fat by 40-70%. However, if you must eat that pork sausage, you can slice them thinly, cook it, drain that fat. You can even take a paper towel and blot them aggressively. Now, if you like chicken, cook it without the skin. By doing so, you can cut the total fat by 40-50%. Grilling, roasting on a rack, or air frying will also allow the fat to drip away, but there's a trade-off because you'll probably burn your food. And if you're like many people, you're eating dairy products. Cheese and full-fat dairy products are one of the most concentrated fat sources in the diet. This is cream cheese. It has 7 grams of fat, 4.5 grams of saturated fat. This is true for many milk products. Cheese is especially impactful because it's easy to overeat, and you're often adding it to already fatty foods. You can try eating lean cheeses or simply just limit the amount of cheese you eat and how often you eat it.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes, and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
And if you have a sweet tooth, then you're probably topping off your meals with baked goods and desserts. I suspect you're enjoying them between your meals. Cakes, muffins, pies, pastries, brownies, breakfast, baked items, they all contain a significant amount of fat from butter, shortening, eggs, and then you have the sugar. That creates a potent fat-carb combination. I have a sweet tooth as well, and I have taught myself over the years to swap ingredients. And by simply swapping to better quality ingredients, I've changed my metabolism and significantly improved my health. And I know because I have more energy than I ever had before. I am more productive than I ever was in college. But for you to understand how to swap ingredients, it's important that we all get on the same page with the definition of dietary fats and the role of your body fats. Now, fats that you eat don't randomly just become blubber on your body. They do dictate your blood pressure. Freedom of choice is great until they fool you with bad choices. And you have the choice to choose between 3 main dietary fats. Actually, the processed food companies, they slipped a 4th type of artificial fat called trans fat that is totally toxic to people. And thank goodness Walter Willett of Harvard got most of that out of our food supply. So if there's one person that you should listen to, that's Walter Willett. That man knows what he's talking about, unlike most social media influencers and so-called experts. Unfortunately, Walter Willett isn't our food czar, so there's still trans fat and plenty of it hiding in our food supply. And I'll tell you about that later. So there are three main types of fat that your body has and actually needs, but your body can only make two of them. So there's saturated fat and monounsaturated fat. The third fat is actually essential for you to eat, polyunsaturated fat. All three are natural fats. They're spread throughout the animal and plant kingdom. The most difficult fat to find is polyunsaturated fat. And that's why most Americans have extremely low dietary intake and low blood levels. That sounds bad, and it actually is. So don't listen to BS, excuse my language, people telling you that fat is essential or necessary for you to eat, especially in excess. Yeah, don't listen to that. These fats, they behave differently when you eat them in excess, and they will raise your blood pressure. Anything you eat in excess gets turned into saturated fat, whether that's butter, lard, ice cream, yogurt, cheese, coconut, palm oil. So anything with any animal products has saturated fat. Essentially, land animals and a few plants contain a lot of saturated fat. And you are a land animal, so you too have plenty of saturated fat. Those love handles, that's saturated fat. And when you go inside your organ, that's visceral fat that cakes onto your organ and your gut that causes you metabolic problems. Now, unfortunately, saturated fat will raise your blood pressure, but it does so indirectly. It causes arterial stiffness, it's impaired nitric oxide signaling, it worsens insulin resistance, and it activates the sympathetic nervous system and the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. This leads to a higher vascular tone and greater sodium retention, both to elevate your blood pressure. Now, saturated fat doesn't usually cause an immediate blood pressure spike, but chronically eaten, it will shift your vessels towards being smaller, narrower, harder, or less elastic, and more reactive, especially when you're not eating fiber and you're sedentary. Saturated fat also increases LDL cholesterol, particularly cholesterol particles that contribute to arterial stiffness and plaque formation. So this pathophysiology puts you at risk for strokes, back pain, impotence, kidney damage, weakened immunity, and heart disease. Now, the second type of fat in these nuts are monounsaturated fats. Now, these fats are abundant in the animal kingdom, found in your vegetable oils like avocado, corn, canola, olive, sunflower, safflower, soybean, and peanut oils. These are the present-day cooking oils. They are also present in low-fat or fat-free dairy products, skinless meat and lean meats, fatty fish, seafood, again, nuts and seeds, and lots of different types of beans, peas, lentils, and tofu. Now, when you buy processed foods like salad dressings or mayonnaise, soft margarines, a lot of them are based on monounsaturated fats. Have you ever wondered when these processed oils entered the market? 1911. That's the year Crisco launched its fully artificial, industrialized, hydrogenated vegetable shortening made of cottonseed oil. It was basically a bucket of trans fat. Now, they've revamped the formula, but there's still trans fats in it. They just don't report it on their nutrition labels. 0 grams of trans fat is on many of these labels because 0 grams doesn't mean it needs to be 0. It could be up to 0.5 grams per serving. So some artificial trans fat may still exist despite their labeling, unless the ingredient specifically states otherwise. And it's interesting that coronary heart disease became a more prevalent problem in the first half of the 20th century and a leading cause of death by 1920. It peaks in 1960. Obviously, there are many different factors, including smoking, the rise of processed food, refined carbohydrates, and sedentary lifestyles. But let's not go backwards, folks. Now, the third type of fat are called polyunsaturated fats. And these are the only fats that are essential, and you do need to ingest it. Polyunsaturated fats, or PUFA, should be 5 to 10% of our daily calories, with emphasis on quality and balance. So if you eat a 2,000 calorie diet, that works out to 11 to 22 grams of PUFAs in total. Now, nuts, seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, all serve as a great source of PUFAs. So their vegetable oils have some, just like corn and cottonseed, soybean, sunflower. They all have some polyunsaturated fats. Beef tallow, butter, not a source of polyunsaturated fat, folks, no matter how you spread it. But if you really wanted an animal product that's high in polyunsaturated fats, those are marine animals. So that means eating fish, fish oil, or marine oils. They contain high amounts of polyunsaturated fats. And certain fish like herring, mackerel, salmon, trout, and tuna are considered rich in polyunsaturated fats compared to other fish. Now, the problem is that the ocean is a giant toilet bowl. Have you seen what we throw in it? Have you watched those giant plastic mounds floating in the ocean? Now, when I was growing up, I heard all about how plastics were harming ocean animals because they would get caught in like those plastic soda rings, and turtles would eat plastic grocery bags. Well, we're eating microplastics ourselves every time we eat ocean animals or sea salt. And now we're finding these plastics in our heart, in our brain, and it probably eventually we'll figure out that it's increasing our risk of all sorts of diseases in all these different organs. Some would call this karma. But the bigger problem is that large fish have a lot of heavy metals and arsenic. You just simply can't get rid of those. So you should consider limiting your intake of seafood. But land animals also collect toxins too. There are different polyunsaturated fats. Omega-3 fats can lower blood pressure by reducing vascular inflammation, improve arterial compliance, and dampen the sympathetic tone. Now, omega-6 fats are also polyunsaturated. They are also essential, but excess can promote oxidative stress and endothelial dysfunction, which can raise blood pressure over time. There's a lot of bad talk against omega-6. It's really not omega-6 by itself, but the modern diet just overloads our diet with omega-6 relative to omega-3. Remember, excess fat, even omega-6, gets stored as saturated fat. So the best way to eat your polyunsaturated fat is to just eat whole foods. Just go eat nuts and seeds. Now, all these fats have non-interchangeable roles in how they affect our cells, how they change our hormone signalings, our nerve fire, how our energy is stored and released. And the problem is not those fats inherently, but it's from the dose, balance, and food source. And again, which fats does your body actually need? All of them, including saturated fat. Remember earlier I said that you don't have to eat all the fats because your body can make some of them? You make plenty of saturated fat every time you overeat any calories, whether that's fat calories, carbohydrate calories, or protein calories. Don't overeat, folks, even protein. It just turns into saturated fat and makes you fat. And unfortunately, excess saturated fat above and beyond what your body can use just clogs up pipes and makes cells fat that aren't supposed to be fat. Some is necessary, but too much goes to the wrong places and become unnecessary and damaging. And we often think of saturated fat as reliable energy reserve, but it also plays a structural role. It makes steroid hormones such as cortisol, estrogen, testosterone. And without saturated fat, your cell membranes actually become too fragile and leaky. And the issue is we have just too much in our modern diet because everybody's eating ultra-processed carbohydrates trapped with a bunch of environmental toxins. And our modern diets are pushing our physiology beyond what we can handle. So think of your blood vessels as drain pipes in your kitchen. How long do you think you can pour grease down your kitchen pipes and not have a problem? And what happens when you just turn on the water? Well, water and fat doesn't mix. It separates, right? So nothing happens. It just still cakes on the side of the walls. So when you eat saturated fat, essentially, that's what it's doing to the side of your blood vessels, folks. And you can tell they're saturated fat because at room temperature, that fat is solid. However, when you eat more monounsaturated fat, it gives you more flexibility and metabolic safety. These fats, they too also make cell membranes. They allow it to be more fluid. They make receptors like insulin and neurotransmitters to function properly. They improve your lipid transport, reduce LDL oxidation and support, and increases your mitochondrial efficiency. And by doing so, their effect on your blood pressure is actually neutral and maybe even a little bit beneficial. Monounsaturated fats should be replacing saturated fat in membranes without triggering inflammation. And that's why diets rich in monounsaturated fats are consistently associated with better cardiovascular metabolic outcomes. Polyunsaturated fat, though, is essential and it controls inflammation. And again, you can't make any of these polyunsaturated fats, especially omega-3 and omega-6. They must come from your diet, and you must get them because these fats are used to build brain tissue, retinal cells, sperm membrane, immune signaling molecules. Omega-3s literally help resolve inflammation and maintain your cognitive thinking, your neuronal functions. Omega-6 are also required for growth, repair, and immune activation. We just need to have the right balance. There's a healthy omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which is roughly 1-to-1, and maybe even 4-to-1. But our modern Western diets, the ratio sits around 15 to 20-to-1, sometimes even higher. And this isn't just because you're not getting enough omega-3. People are actually taking too much omega-6. And at those ratios, omega-6 derived signaling overwhelms omega-3 pathways, and it can tilt the body towards more inflammation, impaired insulin signaling, elevated LDL oxidation, and endothelial dysfunction. Simply put, it's not good to overeat any type of fat. More is not necessarily better. Again, body fat is essential for your body to store any calories that are excess. Fats are pretty important, right? And where fats go depends on what type you're eating. So if you're struggling with high blood sugars, then just know that saturated fat will raise your blood sugars higher for longer, and excess monounsaturated fats will also do the same. So if this is your biology, then it's important to avoid saturated fat and to not eat excess monounsaturated fat. Fat basically signals to your body that you have too much food. Hence, it shuts off your sugar metabolism to conserve energy. So instead of burning energy with sugar, it starts to store it. Speaking of burning, have you ever burnt food? I used to do that all the time. And the other day I was heating up my pan with some oil and it started smoking. I was basically burning the oil. That's the smoke point of the oil, which is not a good thing. Every oil has a different smoke point, and I pick my vegetable oils to cook on based on the smoke points. For example, avocado oil has a high smoke point, but extra virgin olive oil has a low smoke point. This means that it'll heat up, hit the smoke point, and get oxidized much more easily than avocado oil. And I know this may be confusing, and that's why I made an entire video about cooking oils. It's definitely worth watching so that you can pick the best oils to cook with. See you there. I told you I would tell you what John Adams ate. For 60 years, he basically ate for his garden, and seems like he ate a whole food, plant-based diet because he wrote about it.